Hey Lighthouse Kids, it's Megan Beck, and we're going to jump right back into what God was doing many thousands of years ago in the lives of the people of Israel. Now remember, the people of Israel were promised to God's servant Abraham. Abraham was a man of faith who followed God. His son Isaac followed God. Jacob made some mistakes, but ultimately he followed God, and his name was changed to Israel. Now his sons became the tribes of Israel, and many, many more people were born. And God showed that he was there for his people in so many ways. When they were slaves in Egypt, do you remember what happened? God freed them using so many miracles through his servant Moses, who also believed in God. And Moses led them out of Egypt, even by parting the Red Sea, a giant sea that would have seemed like almost an ocean. God opened up and they were able to walk through. In the wilderness, he provided food for them. We learned about manna and quail. And we also know that he worked through his other servant, Joshua, who was a leader, and Joshua led them into the promised land. They were able to conquer a city called Jericho by just walking around the walls, and their belief in God, their faith in him, made those walls fall down. So we have this people of Israel, and it seems like they're doing really well, right? Well, they're only doing well when they have a good leader who's following God. Because what happens next, after Joshua isn't there anymore, is the people forget. Now you might think, how is that possible? How could they forget after God did so many amazing things? Well, they got distracted. There's so many other things to do. If you're in the promised land, things are going well, you get comfortable, you forget that you need God. But God really wanted his people to follow his way. God knows what's best for them. But the people, they said no. They started doing things their own way, and that's when trouble started. You see, the people of Israel, they still had enemies all around. There's a lot of other countries over there, and they knew that Israel followed God, or that they were supposed to, that God had led them there. And so when they saw that Israel stopped following God, they were going to attack. And God let his people get captured sometimes. If Israel wasn't following God, things started to not go so well for them. And so God introduced other leaders, and we're going to call those leaders judges. These judges weren't kings, they weren't pharaohs, not emperors. Judges were more there to provide some leadership and some guidance and teaching for the people. God would speak to the judges, and then the judges would lead the people. The first judge that we're going to talk about is a woman named Deborah. Now, Deborah was a prophetess. That's female for prophet. Maybe you've heard that before. And a prophet is someone who simply gets a message from God and then gives it to the people. So she was a prophetess, and God wanted her to be a judge over the people of Israel. Now, she had to lead the people out to war, for one thing, because they were too scared to go without her. The leader of the army was not willing to go unless Deborah was right there with him, and she was willing to. And whether she got the credit or not, she was willing to be a brave leader of the people. And so the people started following God again. The next one we're going to talk about is a man named Gideon. He was not so brave and not so excited to be a leader, but God chose to use him anyway. He didn't think he deserved to be chosen. He was from a not very significant family, and he didn't think he was right for the job. He wasn't a superhero of any sort. But God used him as well. And he showed God doesn't need great people or great numbers of people to do something great. He just needs us to be willing. He allowed Gideon to lead an army of a very few people against a much greater army, because God had a very interesting tactic. While the other army was sleeping, Gideon's men snuck up. All they had were some torches and some pots that they could crash against the floor, some horns. And the army that was sleeping, because they heard that great noise, thought that the army was so much bigger than it was. And they ended up just running away. They never even had to fight. And so Gideon led Israel to victory again. The third judge we're going to talk about is a man named Samson. Now, you might have heard about him. He's famous for being very strong. He was strong in body, not so strong in spirit or in his heart, because he also made some pretty big mistakes and ended up being captured by his enemies. But still, in the end, because he trusted in God and prayed to God, God allowed him to use his strength to save the people of Israel. But every time a judge died and the people didn't have a leader anymore, they would forget again and again. Between every judge, the people went back to doing evil things and would get into trouble all over again. And I wonder if that's something you can relate to. When your parents are nearby, or when your teachers are nearby, or when people are watching, maybe, we act a certain way. But what about when we're alone? Or when we're around other people who maybe don't care if we do things the right way or not? Who's watching then? Actually, God is still watching then. God wants us to follow him as the ultimate leader. Even when we can't see God, he is here, and he wants to be the leader in our lives. And yes, he provides other great leaders in our lives. Our parents are wonderful examples a lot of the time, and there's leaders in church and in government that we can listen to and follow. But ultimately, our greatest leader is God, and we want to follow his direction and his plan since he knows what's best. So, as we learn to trust him more, let's sing a song of praise and worship called The Father's Plan to really acknowledge this is how God has been working through history and through our lives as well. Let's sing together.
When you breathe life into the ones
Wonderful. Thank you for worshiping together. And I'm excited that we're learning about how to remember more of what God is doing in our lives so that we're not like the Israelites who forget what God has done and go back into doing things wrong. So what I want to encourage you to do is to actually keep a journal. Write down when you have a prayer request and God answers that prayer, write it down so you don't forget. Or when God gives you a special blessing or a word that someone else shares with you, write that down. That journal is going to be really important and something to go back to when you feel discouraged or like going the wrong way. So I encourage you to keep a journal. And I want to remind you all, we have Christmas rehearsals, the Christmas skit rehearsals. We had our first one this past Wednesday. It was wonderful. Thank you to those of you who came and sang. And we're going to do another one this Wednesday, 6:15 to 7 o'clock, just 45 minutes, nice and easy. It's going to be a great time. And then if not there, I look forward to either seeing you in person on Sunday morning or back here online. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye.